Hello, my name is Ngom Gafor, and I edit Africally Speaking. With some of the world's most prominent economies, expanding markets, and a large young population, Africa is poised for global leadership. But security risks remain a threat to its progress. From Al-Shabaab attacks in Kenya to Boko Haram bombings in Nigeria and neighboring countries, terrorism is proving an increasing challenge for the continent. As its leaders seek assistance internationally, security experts David Otto, Chris Samuel, and Raphael Akazara argue that Africa's solutions lie within its borders. At the University of East London, I sat down with David Otto and Chris Samuel. My education on imaginative counterterrorism started with an explanation of what their company, TGS, is about.
This is what we've experienced by traveling to these areas in northern Nigeria and northern Cameroon.
So in terms of when you organized the event which you put together, and I know there were delegates from many different governments,
Yes. Okay.
how seriously is the UK government, which, let's face it, is the primary government of these young people traveling to Nigeria, how seriously are they taking this problem? How seriously are our embassies here taking this problem?
Well, I mean, I don't think the embassies have paid enough attention to what we're seeing back in May. Because even shortly after the conference, I think we even sent a letter to the president-elect that time to just highlight most of the problem that we highlighted during the conferences there. And then it's just unfortunate that most of it has come to pass. Because my colleague Dave gave a very, very, very detailed analysis of the trend. And then even all these refugees crises at that time, there is something that we've foreseen and that we spoke about during the conference as well. You know, and then like maybe recently the attack that happened in France, we realized that maybe there was a terrorist that masquerade, as a refugee, came through Turkey and then in France. We spoke about it, but people don't pay attention to it. And the irony of that as well is that even during the conference, I don't think we have any. Do we have any representative from Nigeria?
I think we had a representative from Nigeria. Yes, but that representative, was meant to speak and come early to the conference, but that didn't happen for one reason or another. And as Chris is saying, the African governments are more, prone to reactive measures rather than proactive measures. And this is something we've actually been very, very vocal about. African governments have to be able to take responsibility, to address some of the issues that we've spoken about taking care of the African community, to ensure that, young people who are Africans, do not get themselves entangled in this area of radicalization and vulnerabilities. But when we had a conference, yes, there were a lot of international organizations and bodies, from the United Kingdom. Embassies, came from, it was attended by Western embassies more than by the African embassies, and this is something which, surprises us, because the Western governments are more interested in understanding what is happening in Africa and what is happening to the African communities in the UK than the African embassies themselves, so which is contrary to our expectations.
Exactly, that's something that seriously needs to be tackled.
It does.
So while the government front seems to be lagging in terms of specifically, particularly Africans, I should say, I know that through CISO you teach or you facilitate practical steps that young people who are thinking about becoming radicalized or have fallen into that dark world, really, we try and help them. So I want to know, for example, what do you do to try and prevent people from picking up arms and going to northeastern Nigeria to bomb somebody? And for those who have been and back, how do you help them to become part of society again?
The web in terms of radicalization is very, very complex, and what we've done is we've categorized young people within certain steps. So the solution that you provide to one young man has to be quite unique to their circumstances. So what we've done is, we've developed a 6-step process whereby we look at radicalization from the ordinary human's perspective. So saying people who are not yet radicalized, who are not vulnerable, should be tackled first by providing them with awareness programs.
Yeah.
So when a young man, becomes, a teenager, you need to make them to understand what is vulnerability. What are some of those things that, will lead them to vulnerability? So is it about racism? Is it about discrimination? Is it about poverty? Is it about your personal circumstances? Or is it about a young man who's been bullied in school? So you talk to them about these various avenues whereby, they can come to us and explain to us some of their problems that they're facing within the community, some of the problems that they face in schools, So that itself tackles the idea of vulnerability. Once, they've become vulnerable already, now they move into the process of being radicalized. Now, those vulnerabilities have now moved a step further into a process of radicalization, whereby, the young people are now susceptible to online and offline radicalization. In the UK, for instance, they are more likely than not to be radicalized online. But in the case of Africa, they are more likely than not to be radicalized offline, so in the streets. So what we do in terms of when a young man has been radicalized, whether it's online or offline, we look at the particular circumstances of that young man. We speak to them. Why did they get radicalized and how? So by understanding why and how they've been radicalized, we can now provide solutions. So for instance, if a young man says they've been radicalized because, they don't have the traditional support system, they have no parents or they have no role models to speak to, they have no education, or they have no viable options within the community that the government has been able to provide for them, what we do is we channel them towards different support systems that the United Kingdom has already developed. So if it is about inviting an imam to speak to them about interpretation, we would facilitate that. If it is about getting them back to school, we'll facilitate that. If it's about sending them through a social service system, we facilitate that. But that only happens depending on the circumstances of that young person.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of that, then we move now to the next level, which if a young man has already been radicalized and he's become involved in extremism, now what we have to understand is extremism should not only be seen from the Islamic perspective, because there are various levels of right-wing, left-wing, animal activist extremism. But in the case of Islamic extremism, we would now be able to look at, the role of powerful role models within the Islamic communities.
Yeah.
So we have liaisoned with different imams, whereby we can send young people, or we can invite them to speak to young people and find out where did they get it wrong. Because most of the times, people become extreme because of interpretation of the Quran or the Hadith. So once that has been reinterpreted, and some of the fundamental problems of that young man has been resolved, most often than not, you find that this young man will get de-radicalized. So it is always a situation of looking at the particular problems of a particular young person and then look for the solution that would be adapted to those problems. Now, if a young man is already engaged in terrorism, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
Because now you're not talking about prevention anymore, you're not talking about de-radicalization anymore, you're talking about disengagement. So disengagement is a situation whereby, the young man has to stop performing violent extremism. So you get them away, you tell them, the best way to stop violent extremism is not to use arms. The best way for you to channel your ideas is not to use arms. So we disengage them from becoming violent extremists.
How do you even get to them to be able to disengage them?
Well, it is very challenging. One of the big issues that we face when it comes to de-radicalization or disengagement is what you call referrals. How do you get young people to be referred to you is one big problem that we always have. But we do work with communities. We do work with parents who possibly call us and say, my son is going through this process, can you help? So we need referrals. You go to prisons, you go to various community groups where young people are free to give their experiences, and this is how you get referrals, understanding the problems that young men are facing. So when you speak about the disengagement part of it, this is the most difficult because this person has already been involved in criminality. So the due process has to come in. You cannot do anything without the due process. Yeah, so that we understand that, the law has to take its course. But in terms of what we do, we would encourage that, young men are disengaged. They go through a de-radicalization program. Then you address some of the vulnerabilities that actually led them to become involved in terrorism in the first place. And we have another stage which we call the counter-narrative stage. Yeah. Counter-narrative stage is essentially the stage whereby preachers who have been able to get young men, preach to them, brainwash them into following radical ideas. What we do is we get very, very powerful imams who are as powerful as those men and say, can you actually reinterpret the Quran, so that it can reflect what it actually reflects. So the counter-narrative stage is a stage whereby you fight terrorism from the online perspective. You also fight it from providing alternative arguments which are inclusive of social cohesion, arguments which are inclusive of interfaith communities. So in terms of the counter-narrative, that's very, very important, because the counter-narrative aspect of it, actually what it actually does is it puts the young person back into the track that the young person has been derailed from, in terms of understanding what the Quran and what the Hadith actually proclaims. Okay. So it is a stage which is quite huge. And in order for you to de-radicalize or disengage a young man, is very, very difficult, but it takes time, but it has to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you spoke, I also started thinking about, you read the stories of young girls now traveling to Syria, becoming ISIS brides and so on. I wonder, Chris, I'll ask you this: is this something you're seeing in the African community as well? Young girls trying to go out to Nigeria or Niger?
Well, I mean, it's not something that we've personally, seen, in Nigeria. But I mean, it's difficult to measure that in Nigeria. That everybody travel there. You don't know what they're going there for. Yeah. So it's difficult. I mean, because the difficulty that we have in doing anything in Nigeria is that there's no framework.
Okay.
The framework that exists there enables people to know when they travel and things like that. It's everybody that lives in the system is like as if they have plate number attached to them.
That's true. That's true.
Those kind of thing doesn't exist.
In
Nigeria. So we're trying to maybe help the government to maybe have a framework and database system, to be able to know who's coming, who's going, what are they there for, and what is their intention. That's going to be the starting point for us to be able to know who's going to Nigeria to join maybe Boko Haram as a bride or anything.
Absolutely. The challenge is there.